All right, this is one of the big deals in trigonometry. What we're going to be looking at is evaluating trig expressions in all four quadrants using our common angles for right now. So in other words, what's the sine of 225 degrees? What's the cosine of 300 degrees? What's the tangent of 135 degrees? All right, just being able to look at that, think for a moment, and know the answer. All right, we're getting exact values, not approximations from a calculator. Okay, in order to do these, there's two things we need to know. One, we've already done, and that's evaluating sine, cosine, and tangent from 0 to 90 degrees for our common angles. In other words, making that chart. So, sine theta, cosine of theta, tangent of theta, given that theta is 0 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees. You need to be able to generate that chart because we need this to do these. So do that right now. All right, remember the easy way to do it's to follow the pattern. So we start with sine of 0 degrees is 0. And then as we go down that column for sine, we get 1 over 2, root 2 over 2, root 3 over 2, and root 4 over 2, which is 2 over 2, which is 1. For cosine, we get the exact same thing in reverse. So we start down here with the 0, or if you want to start with the 1 and go down, you can do it that way. I just like doing the same pattern going up. 0, root 1 over 2, root 2 over 2, root 3 over 2, root 4 over 2, which is 1. And then for tangent, the ones I remember real easily are the 0. I skip and get the 1. I skip and get the undefined. And then I get the root 3 ones in between. The smaller one comes first, the root 3 divided by 3, and then just the root 3. Okay? So we're going to need to know those in order to do these. The other thing we're going to need to know is whether a trig function is going to be positive or negative depending on what quadrant we're in. And so what I mean by that is when we're in the first quadrant, any point in the first quadrant, both of the coordinates are positive, x coordinate and y coordinate. So whether I do x over y, y over r, because remember r is always positive. No matter what I do, I'm going to get a positive answer. So in the first quadrant, all 6 trig functions come out to be positive every single time. In the second quadrant, any point in the second quadrant has a negative x and a positive y. So x is going to be negative, y is going to be positive. R is always positive. So when I do sine y over r, I'm getting positive over positive. It's going to be positive. When I do cosine, I'm going to get x over r. Negative divided by positive is going to be negative. When I do tangent, y over x, positive over negative is going to be negative. So of the 3 primary functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, only sine is going to be positive here in the second quadrant because it's going to be y over r. Everybody else gets an x in there, so it's going to be a negative divided by a positive or a positive divided by a negative. When we look at the reciprocal functions, cotangent, secant, and cosecant, a reciprocal and the original number always have the same sign, either both positive or both negative, because we need to do positive times positive to get 1, or negative times negative to get positive 1. So the reciprocal of sine is cosecant. So since sine is positive, cosecant has to be positive. But the others will be negative because cosine was negative, so its reciprocal secant will also be negative. Tangent was negative, so its reciprocal cotangent is also going to be negative. So in the second quadrant, sine and cosecant end up being positive. Everybody else is negative. So what we're going to be doing is keeping track here of who comes out positive. So they're all positive in the first. Sine and cosecant are positive in the second. For any point in the third quadrant, it's a negative x and a negative y. Again, r is still going to be positive because when we do x squared plus y squared, we're going to get positives. So when I look at sine, y over r, negative divided by positive, that's negative. When I look at cosine, x over r, negative divided by positive, that's also negative. When I look at tangent, y over x, negative divided by negative, that's going to be positive. So tangent will be positive. And then by reciprocals, x over y will also be negative divided by negative. Cotangent will also be positive. But secant and cosecant will be negative because they're the reciprocals of sine and cosine, which were negative. So in quadrant 2, tangent and cotangent, or quadrant 3, tangent and cotangent will always be negative. Everyone else will be positive. Excuse me, other way around. Tangent and cotangent will be positive. Everyone else will be negative. Fourth quadrant, any point in the fourth quadrant is positive and then negative. So positive x, negative y. And you might be able to guess what's going to happen here. We got sine and cosecant here. We got tangent and cotangent here. Yeah, the ones we haven't gotten yet are going to work here. Again, r is going to be positive. So when I do x over r, cosine, positive over positive, cosine will be positive, and then its reciprocal, r over x, will also be positive. That's secant. And then everybody else is going to be negative. Y over r, negative over positive. Y over x, negative divided by positive. So what happens is in all the quadrants, everybody's positive twice. They're always positive in the first, and then everybody gets one more turn to be positive. And so everybody's going to be negative twice. So sine, for instance, is positive in the first and second. It's negative in the third and fourth. Cosine's positive in the first and the fourth. It's negative in the second and the third. One little mnemonic device that's used to help you remember who's positive where is in the first quadrant, they're all positive, A. In the second quadrant, sine's positive, and so we know it gets its reciprocal cosecant. In the third quadrant, tangent's positive, and in the fourth quadrant, cosine's positive. So the way we remember this, who goes where, is we start in the first quadrant, and we remember the device that all studs take calculus. And you will someday too. So if you can remember that all studs take calculus, then you can remember who's positive in which quadrants. And remember, you also get the reciprocals. So everybody, they're all positive in the first. Sine, which means its reciprocal cosecant's positive in the second. Tangent, and its reciprocal cotangent are positive in the third. And cosine, and its reciprocal secant are positive in the fourth. So we need to know that now. So when I say what's the sine, for instance, of 225 degrees, you're going to say, hey, 225 is in the third quadrant. Well, I know the answer is going to be negative. Sine's positive in the third quadrant. Only tangent and cotangent are positive. Now we just have to figure out negative 1. So what we're really doing here is combining our chart with our all studs take calculus. So let's do that and start doing some of these. So let me write down, I'll put it right over here, my little all studs take calculus. And so let's go with that, sine of 225 degrees. So what I do, the way I do them in order, and I just do this mentally, is I first think to myself, what's the reference angle for 225? Because if you visualize it, 225, that's down here, we're looking at this triangle. Well, that's my reference angle. So if I can find the sine of that angle, then back in the first quadrant, it's going to be the same triangle with that angle. So when I know this reference angle, okay, reference angle in the third quadrant, 225 minus 180 is going to be 45. So the sine here is going to be exactly the same as the sine there because these are both 45-degree angles. All I then have to worry about is the answer positive or negative? So I'm going to think to myself, well, I'm really thinking, what's the sine of 45 degrees? That's up here in my chart. Sine of 45 degrees is root 2 over 2. But in the third quadrant, is sine going to be positive or negative? Third quadrant, tangent and cotangent are positive, so sine is negative. So sine of 225 is negative root 2 over 2. And that's basically the way you're going to mentally think through each one of these. They're going to give you this expression. You're going to think, what's the reference angle? Let me now go get that out of my chart. And now I have to decide if it's positive or negative by all studs take calculus. So let's just start practicing those. What if I want to know the cosine of 300 degrees? I'm going to first think, what's my reference angle for 300 degrees? Let's see, fourth quadrant, so 360 minus 300. I'm really thinking, what's the cosine of 60 degrees? Cosine of 60 degrees, boom, there it is, 1/2. Now all I need to know is the answer positive or negative? 300 degrees is quadrant 4, fourth quadrant, cosine's positive. So I'm just going to leave that, positive 1/2. And we now just go through this same process every single time. What's the tangent of 315 degrees? Well, what's the reference angle for 315? Let's see. Hopefully, again, we just start knowing these, that's 45 degrees. If you don't, you're thinking fourth quadrant, 360 minus 315, that's 45. So I'm really asking myself back up here in the first quadrant, what's tangent of 45 degrees? Tangent of 45 degrees is 1. So I'm going to get 1. But the question is, will it be positive or will it be negative? 315 is in the fourth quadrant. Cosine and secant are positive. Tangent is not. So tangent of 315 must be negative 1. Again, we're just going through that same process, same thought process every time. What's the reference angle? Get the value out of the chart and determine positive or negative. Those same 3 steps every single time. They might throw in a quadrantal angle on you. What's the cosine of 180 degrees? So you say, well, reference angle for 180, that's going to be 0 degrees. Cosine of 0 degrees in my chart, cosine of 0 is 1. And now with the quadrantal angles, whenever you get 1, you're really on the wrong side, so it's going to be a negative 1. Or another way to think of that is cosine's positive here in the first and fourth. Well, 180 is right on the border here between second and third. So cosine's negative here, it's negative there, it's going to stay negative here. So we're going to get a negative 1 instead of a positive 1. The quadrantal angles we'll have to practice a little more. They're a little bit trickier, just thinking through the positive or negative because they're not in one of these quadrants. For today, we're just going to look at sine, cosine, and tangent. Tomorrow, we'll start doing cotangent, secant, and cosecant. So you see if you can do this one now. Let's do the sine of 240 degrees. Do it. So I think to myself, what's the reference angle for 240? That's third quadrant, 240 minus 180, 60 degrees. Sine of 60 degrees. Go look in my chart. Sine of 60 degrees, root 3 over 2. Now I just have to ask positive or negative. Third quadrant, tangent and cotangent are positive, so sine must be negative. Negative root 3 over 2. Same process. Let's do another. Cosine of 150 degrees. You do that one. I ask myself, what's the reference angle for 150? That's 30 degrees. Cosine of 30 degrees is root 3 over 2. 150 is in the second quadrant. Sine and cosecant are positive in the second, not cosine, so it's negative in the second quadrant. So this is exactly what you're going to be doing on today's assignment. There's about a dozen problems just like this. So you'll get yourself the chart, draw yourself the little all studs take calculus picture, and then each time you get one of these, determine the reference angle, go to the chart to get the value, and then determine if the answer is going to be positive or negative.